The massive council chamber on Nexus Prime had never seen such chaos. Hundreds of alien representatives from across the galaxy were shouting, arguing, and clicking their various appendages in what could only be described as pure panic. The emergency. Alarms had been blaring for 3 hours straight, and the air recyclers were working overtime to handle the stress pheromones being released by dozens of different species. Admiral Kethvar, a towering reptilian creature with scales that shifted, color based on his mood, stood at the center of it all. His scales were currently a deep crimson, which anyone familiar with his species knew meant he was terrified. With one massive claw, he activated the holographic display that dominated the chamber's center. The image that appeared made even the bravest warriors in the room fall silent. Stretching across 3 entire star systems was the Zephyrian Empire's bio-armada. These weren't normal spaceships made of metal and circuits. These were living creatures, bred and grown specifically for war. Each biocruiser pulsed with a sickly, green light, their organic hulls breathing like massive lungs. Tentacles writhed along their sides, each one tipped with weapons that could melt through standard starship armor like butter. 3,000 of them, Admiral Kethvar's voice echoed through the chamber's translation systems. 3,000 biocruisers, each one capable of healing itself during battle. They've already consumed the Outer Rim colonies. Billions are dead. The representatives erupted into fresh arguments. The Centauri delegation was screaming about evacuation protocols. The hegemony military commanders were calculating how long their fleets could hold defensive positions. The smaller species were simply crying, or making whatever sounds their biology allowed for expressing despair. That's when Captain Kim Day stepped forward. She was human, which made her one of the newer additions to the Galactic Council. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and most species still considered them primitive newcomers. Kim was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching the chest plates of most alien representatives, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Earth offers 12 vessels for the defense, she announced, her voice somehow carrying clearly. Through the chaos without her needing to shout. The chamber fell silent for exactly 3 seconds, then the laughter began. It started with a few chuckles from the hegemony section, then spread like wildfire through the entire assembly. Commander Veltash, whose species looked like oversized praying mantises, stood up and pointed one of his forearms at Captain Kim. 12 ships, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. We're facing 3,000 Zephyrian biocruisers that can regenerate from any damage, and the humans offer us a dozen rust buckets? The laughter grew louder. Some species were actually falling over from the apparent hilarity of the situation. The Aquatic Federation's representative made a sound like water being forced through a broken pipe, which was their version of hysterical laughter. Captain Kim stood perfectly still, her face showing no emotion. She had expected this reaction. Humanity's ships were indeed different from the sleek, elegant vessels that made up the rest of the galactic fleet, where alien ships were smooth curves and flowing lines, powered by exotic energy sources and equipped with weapons that bent the laws of physics. Human ships looked like they had been built in a scrapyard by someone with anger management issues. The human vessels were all angles and sharp edges, covered in armor plating that looked crude compared to the energy shields used by everyone else. They ran on chemical rockets and fusion drives, technology that most species had abandoned thousands of years ago. Their weapons were even more primitive, firing actual projectiles instead of energy beams. Admiral Thexron, the overall commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet, finally restored order by pounding his massive fist on his podium. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Captain Kim," he said, trying to keep the amusement out of his voice and failing completely, "we appreciate Earth's enthusiasm. Your 12 ships will be assigned to escort duty. You can help evacuate civilian populations from the outer colonies." It was a polite way of saying they would be kept far away from any real fighting. The alien commanders clearly believed that humanity's primitive technology would only get in the way of the real military forces. The fabric of space itself seemed to scream as the Zephyrian war fleet ripped through hyperspace. It wasn't like watching normal ships travel between stars. Normal ships would appear as bright flashes of light, clean and orderly, as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. But the Zephyrians were different. They were something that shouldn't exist. Their bioships didn't just travel through hyperspace, they infected it. As they approached the defense line, reality itself seemed to twist and writhe around them. The hulls of their vessels pulsed like massive hearts, pumping unknown fluids through veins that ran along their surfaces. These weren't machines built in factories. They were grown in breeding pits, fed on the remains of conquered worlds until they reached maturity. Each biocruiser was unique, shaped by its own twisted evolution. Some looked like massive squid with tentacles that sparked with bioelectric energy. Others resembled sharks the size of skyscrapers, their mouths lined with weapons that looked disturbingly like teeth. A few had sprouted what could only be called wings, though they served no purpose in the vacuum of space, except to make them look even more terrifying. The largest of them, the bio-dreadnoughts, defied description. They were living mountains of flesh and chitin covered in thousands of smaller organisms that served as both armor and weapons. As they moved, parts of their hulls would split open to reveal new weapon systems, organic cannons that grew and withered based on the tactical situation. 3,000 of these nightmares were bearing down on the hastily assembled galactic defense fleet. Even experienced military commanders who had fought in dozens of wars found themselves struggling not to panic at the sight. The combined forces of 12 different species had managed to gather nearly 2,000 ships for the defense. It should have been an impressive sight. The Centauri brought their crystal ships that sparkled like jewels, powered by captured starlight. The Hegemony contributed their massive battle cruisers, each one a perfect example of military engineering, with energy shields that could deflect almost any attack. The Aquatic Federation's vessels were works of art, flowing like liquid metal through space with weapons that fired concentrated plasma. The Silicon Collective had sent their geometric ships, all perfect angles and mathematical precision, equipped with reality-warping technology that could bend space itself. They arranged themselves in the traditional battle formation that had been used successfully for thousands of years. The heavy battleships formed the front line, their massive energy cannons charging with enough power to crack planets. Behind them came the cruisers and destroyers, ready to exploit any gaps in the enemy formation. Support vessels hung back, prepared to provide repairs and ammunition resupply. It was a beautiful sight, if you ignored the approaching horror. The alien ships gleamed in the light of nearby stars, their hulls polished to perfection. Energy fields danced around them like aurora, and their weapons hummed with barely contained power. This was the pinnacle of galactic military technology, the combined might of civilizations that had been perfecting warfare for millennia. And then there were the humans. 12 ships that looked like they had been hammered together by angry blacksmiths. Where the alien vessels were smooth and elegant, the human ships were all brutal angles and exposed armor plating. They had no energy shields, no exotic propulsion systems, no reality-bending weapons. Just thick metal hulls, chemical rockets, and what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. Captain Park Jin sat in the command chair of the UES Retribution, watching the enemy approach on his tactical display. His ship groaned and creaked around him as the old fusion drives pushed them forward. The bridge looked like something from a museum compared to the sleek alien command centers. Actual physical controls, manual switches, and displays that showed simple readouts instead of holographic interfaces. Park was a veteran of humanity's various colonial wars, his face scarred from a dozen different battles. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belts, rebels on the outer colonies, and corporate security forces in the shipping lanes, but he had never faced anything like what was coming toward them. "Look at those human antiques," Commander Yilthax's voice crackled across the open communication channels. The alien commander wasn't even trying to hide his contempt. "Metal coffins with fusion drives. There'll be space debris in the first volley." Other alien commanders joined in with their own comments. Some wondered why the humans had even bothered to show up. Others made jokes about collecting the wreckage for scrap metal after the battle. Captain Park said nothing. He just watched the approaching nightmare and waited. The attack came without any of the usual warnings that civilized warfare demanded. No formal declarations, no time for surrender, no chance for negotiation. One moment, the space between the fleets was empty, and the next it was filled with death. The Zephyrian bioships opened fire all at once, 3,000 organic cannons releasing torrents of living plasma that screamed across the void. This wasn't the clean energy fire that galactic militaries were used to. This was something alive, something hungry. The bioplasma writhed and twisted as it flew, actively seeking targets like predators hunting prey. The first volley hit the Centauri crystal ships with devastating effect. Their beautiful gem-like hulls, which had withstood countless battles, began to crack and splinter. But something was wrong. The energy shields that should have absorbed the impact were failing in ways no one had ever seen before. Commander Veltash watched in horror from his flagship as the bioplasma seemed to learn from each impact. The first few shots were deflected by his ship's shields, but each successive blast adapted to the shield frequency. Within seconds, the living ammunition was passing through their defenses, like they weren't even there. "Impossible," he whispered, watching his tactical display as ship after ship reported shield failures. "The plasma is evolving faster than we can adjust our frequencies." The hegemony battlecruisers fared no better. Their massive energy cannons returned fire, sending lances of pure power toward the bioships. For a brief moment, it looked like they might have the advantage. The first shots tore through the organic hulls, leaving gaping wounds that leaked strange fluids into space. But then the wounds began to close. The bioships were healing themselves in real time, their flesh knitting back together while they continued to fire. Worse, their hulls were adapting to the energy weapons, growing new layers of protection that specifically countered the frequency signatures of the Galactic Fleet's arsenal. The Aquatic Federation's liquid metal ships tried to use their mobility advantage, flowing and shifting their shapes to avoid incoming fire. But the bioplasma followed them, tracking their movements with an intelligence that no weapon should possess. When it hit, the living ammunition began eating through their hulls, actually consuming the metal and growing stronger. Within minutes, the perfect battle formation that had taken hours to organize was falling apart. Ships were breaking ranks, desperately trying to find some angle of attack that would work against enemies that adapted faster than they could fire. The communication channels filled with panicked voices, shouting conflicting orders in a dozen different languages. "All ships adjust shield harmonics to frequency 774, Admiral Kethavar commanded, his voice tight with desperation. "Negative, sir," came the reply from the hegemony flagship. "They've already adapted to 774. Trying 812. 812 is compromised," reported a Centauri captain whose ship was already trailing debris. "The plasma is learning our adaptations before we can implement them." The retreat order came faster than anyone expected. Admiral Thexron, who had never ordered a withdrawal in 30 years of military service, found himself with no choice. The enemy was too adaptive, too intelligent, too alive. Traditional warfare simply didn't work against foes that could evolve defenses in real time. "All ships, fall back to secondary positions," his voice boomed across every frequency. "Repeat, all ships retreat to secondary defensive line." The beautiful formations dissolved into chaos as hundreds of ships turned away from the advancing nightmare. Some were already too damaged to retreat effectively, their crews abandoning ship in escape pods. Others limped away on damaged engines, trailing plasma and debris. It was in this moment of absolute defeat that Captain Kim's voice cut through the static and screaming. Human fleet to command requesting permission to engage. The communication channels fell silent for a heartbeat. Every alien commander who heard the transmission thought the same thing. The humans had finally lost their minds. Their 12 primitive ships wanted to attack an enemy that had just devastated 2,000 of the galaxy's most advanced vessels. "Negative, human fleet," Admiral Thexron replied. "Fall back with the rest of the formation, that's an order." But Captain Kim's ships weren't falling back. Instead, the 12 human vessels suddenly broke from their escort position at the rear of the formation. Their chemical thrusters, which had seemed so primitive and slow during the approach, suddenly blazed like tiny stars as they accelerated toward the massive Zephyrian fleet. From the bridge of his retreating flagship, Commander Veltash watched, in disbelief, as the human ships charged straight into the teeth of 3,000 biocruisers. Their angular, brutal-looking hulls stood out starkly against the organic curves of their enemies. It looked like 12 metal insects flying toward a swarm of living nightmares. "They're committing suicide," he muttered, unable to look away from his tactical display. "Those primitive fools are going to get themselves killed for nothing." The human ships accelerated past the retreating galactic fleet, their fusion drives pushing them faster than anyone thought possible. Captain Park Jin, Captain Kim Dae, and 10 other human commanders were about to discover whether their crude, simple weapons could succeed where the galaxy's most advanced technology had failed. The UES Defiance hit the Zephyrian formation like a sledgehammer smashing through a greenhouse. Captain Park Jin gripped his command chair as his ship shuddered from the impact of incoming bioplasma, but his hull held. The thick armor plating that the aliens had mocked as primitive was doing exactly what it was designed to do: absorb punishment and keep fighting. "All weapons, open fire," Park commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around his ship. What happened next changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Instead of the elegant energy beams that had failed so spectacularly, the human ships unleashed something completely different. Kinetic projectiles streaked out from their weapon ports. Chunks of dense metal accelerated to incredible speeds by electromagnetic rails. The bioships had evolved to counter energy weapons. Their living hulls could absorb plasma, deflect lasers, and adapt to any frequency of directed energy attack. But they had no defense against a piece of depleted uranium the size of a telephone pole traveling at 10% the speed of light. The first kinetic round punched through a biocruiser's hull like it was made of paper. The creature didn't even have time to begin healing before the projectile tore through its vital organs and exploded out the other side. Green fluid sprayed into space as the bioship convulsed and died. "What are they firing?" Commander Veltash gasped from his retreating flagship, watching his tactical display in disbelief. "Those aren't energy signatures." The answer came as more human ships opened fire. The UES Vengeance, commanded by Captain Choi Hai, launched a spread of missiles that looked ancient compared to the sophisticated weapons the rest of the galaxy used. But these missiles carried nuclear warheads, something most civilized species had abandoned centuries ago as too crude and dangerous. The nuclear explosions bloomed like deadly flowers among the organic hulls. The bioships, which could heal from energy damage, had no mechanism to recover from having their atoms rearranged by nuclear fire. Entire sections of their hulls simply vaporized, leaving gaping wounds that couldn't regenerate because there was nothing left to regenerate from. Captain Li Min, commanding the UES Retribution from the center of the human formation, watched her tactical display with grim satisfaction. Her ship's computers were struggling to keep up with the kill count as 12 human vessels tore through hundreds of bioships that had seemed invincible just minutes before. "The enemy is trying to adapt," her weapons officer reported. "Their hulls are thickening, trying to absorb kinetic impact." "Then we adapt too," Lee replied. "Switch to armor-piercing rounds. Double the charge on the railguns." This was the human way of war. Not elegant, not sophisticated, but brutally effective. When energy weapons failed, they used kinetic projectiles. When the enemy adapted to kinetic rounds, they switched to nuclear warheads. When nuclear explosions weren't enough, they got creative. The UES Courage, under Captain Kim Dae's command, demonstrated this creativity by ramming a damaged biocruiser at full speed. The human ship's reinforced hull, designed specifically for this kind of brutal contact, punched through the organic vessel's weakened armor. But instead of trying to pull back, Captain Kim triggered her ship's self-destruct sequence while still embedded in the enemy's body. The explosion tore both ships apart, but it also took out 3 nearby biocruisers that were caught in the blast. Radius. It was a trade that no civilized military would consider acceptable, sacrificing one ship to destroy 4 enemies. But the humans weren't fighting by civilized rules. The Zephyrian bioships, for the first time in their conquest of the galaxy, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't understand or counter. Their adaptive abilities were useless against weapons that relied on basic physics rather than exotic energy. Their regenerative powers meant nothing when nuclear fire turned their organic matter into radioactive ash. Captain Park's ship, now deep in the enemy formation, launched boarding, pods at a wounded bio-dreadnought. The pods were crude metal cylinders that punched through the organic hull and deployed squads of human marines in powered armor. While the bioship tried to heal around the boarding pods, the marines inside were setting demolition charges in its vital organs. The explosion that followed lit up space for thousands of kilometers. The bio-dreadnought, larger than most space stations, came apart in sections as internal explosions cascaded through its body. Its death throes took out a dozen smaller bioships that were too close to the destruction. From their retreating positions, the alien commanders watched in stunned silence as humanity's primitive fleet accomplished what their advanced technology could not. The human ships fought like cornered animals, using every dirty trick imaginable. They turned their own vessels into weapons, sacrificed individual ships for tactical advantage, and employed weapons that civilized warfare had long since abandoned. "Impossible," Admiral Thexron whispered, staring at his tactical display. 12 ships are defeating hundreds of biocruisers. How is this possible? The answer was simple, though it would take the rest of the galaxy years to understand it. Humans didn't fight to win glory or demonstrate technological superiority. They fought to survive, and they would use any weapon, any tactic, any sacrifice necessary to destroy their enemies. The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered half the galaxy through biological superiority and adaptive evolution, was learning. It's a harsh lesson. Sometimes the most primitive predator is the most dangerous one. The bioships began to change. It was subtle at first, but the Zephyrian fleet was doing what it had done to every other enemy they'd faced, evolving. The organic hulls started growing thicker armor plates, developing specialized organs to deflect kinetic projectiles. Some biocruisers sprouted what looked like bone shields, angled to deflect incoming rounds. Others began secreting a thick, viscous fluid that was designed to slow down projectiles before they could penetrate. For a moment, it looked like the tide might turn. The first few kinetic rounds from the human ships struck the newly adapted hulls and bounced off harmlessly. Some bioships had even developed magnetic fields to deflect the metal projectiles entirely, but the humans had been watching and waiting. "Sir, enemy hulls are adapting to kinetic impact," reported the weapons officer aboard the UES Defiance. Captain Park Jin smiled grimly. "Then it's time they learned something about human adaptability. Switch to EMP warheads. The electromagnetic pulse weapons were something the galaxy had never seen used in ship-to-ship combat. Most civilized species considered them too crude, too likely to damage their own sophisticated electronic systems. But human ships were built to survive EMP attacks, their systems hardened against electromagnetic interference. The EMP missiles detonated among the bioships like invisible lightning. The electromagnetic pulses fried the bio-neural networks that controlled the organic vessels, sending waves of electrical destruction through their living nervous systems. The bioships convulsed in space, their adaptive abilities shutting down, as their brains were literally scrambled. But the humans weren't done. As the bioship struggled to recover from the EMP attack, Captain Li Min's ship, the UES Retribution, launched a new type of weapon that made even her own crew uncomfortable: chemical weapons. Specifically, industrial-grade acid contained in specialized warheads designed to eat through organic matter. The acid bombs exploded against the bioship's hulls and began dissolving them at the molecular level. The organic tissue tried to regenerate, but the acid was consuming it faster than it could heal. Entire sections of biocruisers simply melted away, leaving gaping holes that exposed their internal organs to the vacuum of space. The alien commanders, watching from their retreating positions, felt something they had never experienced before: genuine horror at human warfare. "They're using chemical weapons," Admiral Kethvar whispered, his scales turning a sickly yellow color. "What kind of species weaponizes industrial acid?" The answer became clear as the human ships deployed even more disturbing tactics. Captain Park's vessel launched dozens of small objects that looked harmless enough until they exploded among a formation of bioships. Space mines, each one packed with enough explosive to cripple a cruiser, detonated in a carefully timed sequence that trapped the organic vessels in a kill zone. While the bioships were reeling from the minefield, more human vessels launched. boarding pods. But these weren't the sleek, sophisticated boarding craft used by other species. These were crude metal cylinders that punched through organic hulls like bullets, each one carrying a squad of human marines in powered armor. The Marines didn't try to capture the bioships. They planted demolition charges in vital organs and fought their way back to extraction points, leaving timed explosives throughout the vessel's bodies. The bioships had no defense against enemies that were literally inside them, setting off bombs in their hearts and brains. Captain Choi Hei's ship, the UES Vengeance, had taken critical damage from a bioplasma strike that had punched through her port armor. Atmosphere was venting from 3 different hull breaches, and her fusion reactor was running at dangerous levels. By all reasonable military standards, she should have retreated for repairs. Instead, she ordered her crew to seal the hull breaches with emergency foam while maintaining fire on 3 separate targets. Her damage control teams worked in spacesuits, welding patches over holes, while enemy fire continued to rain down around them. The ship shuddered and groaned under the punishment, but it kept fighting. "Hull breach on Deck 7, her chief engineer reported over the comm system. "We're losing atmosphere fast." "Seal it with whatever you've got," Choi replied, never taking her eyes off the tactical display. "We're not done here yet." Her weapons continued firing even as her ship was literally coming apart around her. The UES Vengeance had become a mobile weapons platform, trading structural integrity for offensive capability. It was a decision that would have horrified any other species' military commanders, but it was perfectly logical to human thinking. If the ship was going to be destroyed anyway, they might as well take as many enemies as possible with them. The most shocking moment came when Captain Kim Dae's ship, the UES Courage, suffered catastrophic engine failure after a direct hit from a bio-dreadnought. Instead of abandoning ship, she ordered her crew to evacuate while she remained behind, steering the crippled vessel directly toward the largest enemy ship in the area. The UES Courage, now a guided missile with a nuclear reactor for a warhead, slammed into the bio-dreadnought at full speed. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, taking out not just the target, but 6 other bioships that were caught in the blast radius. From their observation positions, the retreating alien fleets watched in stunned silence as the humans demonstrated a form of warfare that was completely beyond their understanding. These weren't just tactics or weapons. This was a fundamental difference in how humans approached conflict. They fought not just to win, but to make sure their enemies never forgot the cost of challenging them. The Zephyrian bioships, which had conquered empire after empire through their adaptive superiority, found themselves facing an enemy that was more adaptable, more vicious, and more willing to sacrifice everything for victory than any species they had ever encountered. The Zephyrian flagship was a nightmare made real. It wasn't just large, it was incomprehensibly massive, a living mountain of flesh and chitin that dwarfed even the biggest space stations. The bio-dreadnought stretched for kilometers in every direction, its surface crawling with thousands of weapon emplacements that looked disturbingly like eyes and mouths. As it moved through space, smaller organisms swarmed around it like antibodies protecting a vital organ. These weren't separate ships, but actual parts of the flagship's body, connected by pulsing umbilical cords that fed them nutrients and battle commands. The entire structure breathed with a rhythm that was visible even from thousands of kilometers away. Captain Park Jin watched the monster approach on his tactical display, feeling his ship shake as another bioplasma volley hammered their already weakened shields. Around him, the bridge crew worked frantically to keep systems online while emergency lights cast everything in an ominous red glow. "Direct hit on the UES Retribution," his communications officer reported. "Captain Lee's ship is venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches." "UES Vengeance is reporting reactor overload," came another update. "Captain Choi is trying to stabilize, but she's lost main power to weapons." Park could see it all on his display. 3 of his ships were already crippled, their crews fighting fires and radiation leaks, while trying to maintain some semblance of combat effectiveness. The remaining 9 human vessels were still fighting, but their weapons were barely scratching. The flagship's massive hull. Every time they managed to punch a hole through the bio-dreadnought's armor, new tissue would grow to fill the gap within minutes. The creature was healing faster than they could damage it, while its weapons fired continuously, without any sign of fatigue or ammunition depletion. "Sir, we're not making a dent," his weapons officer said, frustration clear in his voice. "That thing is just too big, and it's regenerating everything we throw at it." From the observation decks of the retreating alien fleets, military commanders watched the desperate human assault with a mixture of admiration and pity. The humans had fought brilliantly against the smaller bioships, but now they faced something beyond the scale of conventional warfare. "They fought well," Admiral Thexron said quietly, his voice carrying across the communication channels to other fleet commanders. "But that flagship is simply too large. Even humans can't overcome basic physics." That's when Captain Park made a decision that would be remembered for generations across the galaxy. He opened a channel to all remaining human ships, his voice cutting through the static of battle with absolute clarity. "All ships, prepare for antimatter protocol. We're going to crack that thing open." The communication channels of every alien fleet fell completely silent. For a moment, even the sounds of battle seemed to fade as the implications of those words sank in. Antimatter was the most dangerous substance known to science. A single gram of it, when it came into contact with normal matter, would release the energy equivalent of a nuclear bomb. Most civilized species had outlawed its use in warfare centuries ago, not just because of its devastating power, but because of the horrific risk to anyone who tried to weaponize it. Storing antimatter required perfect magnetic containment fields. If those fields failed for even a microsecond, the antimatter would annihilate everything within kilometers. No military commander in their right mind would put such weapons aboard their ships, where battle damage could cause a containment failure and vaporize their own fleet. No civilized military commander anyway. "They're bluffing," Commander Veltash whispered from his flagship, his mandibles clicking nervously. "No species is insane enough to carry antimatter weapons into battle. The risk to their own ships." His words trailed off as he watched the human vessels begin a complex maneuver. Instead of continuing their scattered attacks, they were forming up into a tight formation, moving with the precision of a military unit that had practiced this exact scenario countless times. Captain Li Min's voice crackled across the human fleet's private channel, her ship trailing debris but still functional. "Antimatter charges armed and ready. Containment fields are stable." "UES Vengeance reporting ready," came Captain Choi's transmission, her voice steady despite the fact that her ship was literally held together by emergency patches. "Charge is primed for delivery." One by one, the remaining human ships reported their readiness to deploy weapons that could destroy not just their target, but themselves and everything else within a massive radius. They were talking about antimatter like it was just another tool in their arsenal, not the most dangerous substance in the universe. The alien observers realized with growing horror that the humans weren't bluffing. They had actually built ships capable of carrying and deploying antimatter weapons in combat. They had looked at the most dangerous force in physics and decided to turn it into a weapon of war. The bio-dreadnought, seemingly sensing the change in the tactical situation, began concentrating its fire on the human formation. Bioplasma torrents lashed out with increasing desperation, as if the organic intelligence controlling the flagship understood that it was facing something unprecedented. But the human ships pressed forward through the withering fire, their damaged hulls screaming protests as they accelerated toward the massive enemy. They were committed now to a course of action that would either destroy their enemy completely or annihilate everyone in the star system. For the first time since the battle began, the watching alien fleets understood that they might be witnessing something more than just another military engagement. They were watching a species that had weaponized the fundamental forces of creation itself and was willing to use those weapons even at the cost of their own survival. The three human ships moved through the storm of bioplasma fire like arrows shot from the same bow. The UES Defiance, UES Courage, and UES Valor had formed a tight triangle formation, their hulls already glowing red-hot from the energy weapons trying to stop them. Captain Park Jin could feel his ship groaning under the punishment. Hull plates, buckling, and atmosphere venting from dozens of microfractures. Antimatter containment holding steady, his chief engineer reported, sweat beading on his forehead as he monitored the most dangerous cargo in the galaxy. Magnetic fields are stable, but if we take another direct hit to the containment bay—" "We won't," Park replied with grim certainty, "because we'll be inside that thing before it can kill us." The bio-dreadnought seemed to sense the approaching threat. Its massive body convulsed as thousands of weapon ports opened across its surface, turning the creature into a living constellation of death. Bioplasma torrents lashed out with desperate intensity, while smaller defense organisms swarmed toward the approaching human ships like antibodies attacking an infection. Captain Kim Day, commanding the UES Courage from her damaged bridge, watched, her tactical display, through a haze of smoke from overloaded circuits. Half her crew was already dead, and the other half was keeping her ship running through pure determination and emergency patches. "Hull integrity at 30%, her damage control officer reported. "We're not going to make it to the target." "Yes, we are," Kim replied, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "Even if we have to fly this ship with our bare hands." The UES Valor, under Captain Yoon Seo's command, had lost its main engines and was flying on backup thrusters alone. The ship lurched and rolled as secondary explosions tore through its damaged sections, but it maintained formation with its sister vessels. Their goal wasn't to survive the approach, it was to get close enough to deliver their deadly cargo. The three ships punched through the dreadnought's outer defenses, their kinetic weapons clearing a path through the swarm of smaller organisms. They were past the point of no return now, committed to a collision course with the creature's massive bulk. 10 seconds to impact, Park announced over the fleet channel. "All ships, prepare for antimatter detonation." The bio-dreadnought's surface rushed up to meet them, a landscape of organic armor and pulsing weapons. The three human ships struck the creature's hull simultaneously, their reinforced prows punching deep into the living tissue. For a moment, the massive organism tried to heal around the embedded vessels, treating them like foreign objects to be absorbed and digested. Then the antimatter charges detonated. The explosion began at the quantum level, where matter and antimatter met and annihilated each other in a release of pure energy. In the first microsecond, 3 small points of light appeared deep within the bio-dreadnought's body. In the next microsecond, those points became spheres of destruction, expanding at nearly the speed of light. The creature didn't have time to scream. The antimatter detonation tore through its organic matter, converting mass directly into energy according to Einstein's most famous equation. The bio-dreadnought, which had seemed invincible just moments before, came apart from the inside, as the explosion cascaded through its body. But the destruction didn't stop there. The massive creature's death throes sent shockwaves rippling through space, and its final moments were broadcast across subspace frequencies as a sound that would haunt every survivor of the battle. It was the death scream of something that should never have existed, echoing across dimensions in frequencies that made organic beings feel sick just hearing them. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Dozens of smaller bioships that had been too close to their flagship were caught in the blast wave, their organic hulls vaporized by the expanding sphere of annihilation. The Zephyrian formation, which had seemed so perfectly coordinated, dissolved into chaos as the command structure died with their flagship. Captain Lee Min, watching from the bridge of the heavily damaged UES Retribution, felt her ship shake as the shockwave reached them. Her tactical display showed an expanding cloud of debris where the bio-dreadnought had been, mixed with the scattered remains of dozens of smaller enemy vessels. "My God," her weapons officer whispered. "We actually did it." The remaining Zephyrian bioships, suddenly without their central intelligence to coordinate them, began behaving like animals instead of military units. Some tried to continue fighting, but their attacks were uncoordinated and desperate. Others simply fled, their organic instincts overriding their military programming in the face of an enemy that had just demonstrated the ability to annihilate matter itself. The retreat began as a trickle and became a flood. Bioships that had seemed confident and predatory just minutes before now fled in all directions, abandoning their formation and leaving their wounded behind. The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered half the galaxy through biological superiority, was running from 12 human ships that looked like they'd been built in a scrapyard. Captain Choi Hai's ship, the UES Vengeance, was barely holding together, but she ordered pursuit anyway. Her crew, many of them injured and all of them exhausted, somehow found the energy to chase the fleeing enemy through the debris field that had once been their flagship. From their observation positions, the alien fleets that had been preparing for total defeat could only watch in stunned silence. The Galactic Defense Fleet, with all its advanced technology and sophisticated tactics, had been routed by the Zephyrian bioships. But humanity's primitive fleet had not only stopped the enemy advance, they had shattered it completely. Admiral Therxeron stared at his tactical display, watching as the human ships continued their pursuit of an enemy that outnumbered them by hundreds to one. The kill count was impossible to believe. 12 human vessels had destroyed thousands of bioships, including a flagship that had been the size of a small moon. How? He whispered to himself. How did they do it? The answer was becoming clear to anyone who had watched the battle unfold. The humans hadn't won through superior technology or numbers. They had won because they were willing to do things that no other species would consider. They had weaponized the most dangerous forces in the universe and deployed them without hesitation, even knowing the risks to themselves. The galaxy's understanding of humanity had changed forever. These weren't the primitive newcomers that everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had looked at the fundamental forces of physics and decided to turn them into weapons of war. The silence that followed the battle was almost more unsettling than the fighting itself. Where moments before space had been filled with the screams of dying bioships and the roar of weapons fire, now there was only the quiet hum of rescue operations and the occasional crackle of damaged communication systems. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Chunks of organic matter from the destroyed bioships drifted alongside twisted pieces of metal from damaged human vessels. The antimatter explosion had left a perfect sphere of empty space where the Zephyrian flagship had been, as if reality itself had been scooped out and discarded. Captain Park Jin stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, looking out at the aftermath through a cracked view screen. His ship bore the scars of battle. Hull plates were missing, entire sections were sealed off due to atmosphere loss, and the port side looked like it had been chewed by some massive predator. But it was still flying, still fighting, still human. "Damage report," he said quietly to his chief engineer. "We've lost 40% of our armor plating. Main engines are running at 60% capacity, and we've got hull breaches on 7 different decks," came the reply. "But the reactor's stable, life support is holding, and the weapons are still functional." "She'll fly, sir." Around them, the other surviving human ships were conducting similar assessments. Of the 12 vessels that had charged into the Zephyrian fleet, 9 were still operational. The UES Courage, UES Valor, and UES Defiance had been lost in the antimatter attack, their crews sacrificing themselves to crack open the enemy flagship. The remaining ships bore the marks of their brutal fight: scorched hulls, missing weapon, turrets, and the telltale signs of emergency repairs. But they had won. Somehow, impossibly, they had won. The alien rescue ships approached cautiously, as if they were afraid the human vessels might suddenly turn on them. These were the same species that had mocked humanity's primitive technology just hours before. Now they moved with the careful respect reserved for apex predators. Admiral Kethavar's flagship, the hegemony vessel that had led the retreat, slowly approached the human formation. His communication request was formal and respectful, a far cry from the dismissive tone he had used during the pre-battle briefing. "Captain Park," the Admiral's voice came through the comm system, "on behalf of the Galactic Defense Council, I need to understand how you accomplished this. Our technical analysis teams are requesting permission to examine your weapons systems." Park almost smiled at the request. Hours ago, these same aliens had been laughing at humanity's rust buckets and primitive technology. Now they were begging to understand how those same weapons had accomplished what their advanced energy systems could not. "Our weapons weren't designed for elegance, Admiral," Park replied. "They were designed to kill things efficiently and permanently. The technical analysis that followed would become the foundation for a complete revision of galactic military doctrine." Teams of alien scientists, their previous arrogance replaced by desperate curiosity, poured over the wreckage of human weapons systems. What they found horrified and fascinated them in equal measure. Human kinetic weapons weren't just projectile systems, they were physics problems solved with brute force. The electromagnetic railguns accelerated metal projectiles to velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons, each shot carrying more kinetic energy than most species' main battle cannons. The nuclear warheads were even more disturbing. Most civilized species had abandoned nuclear weapons as crude and dangerous, but humans had refined them into precision instruments of destruction. The warheads were designed to maximize radiation damage to organic tissue while minimizing long-term contamination. And then there were the antimatter charges. The alien analysts could barely believe what they were seeing. Not only had humans weaponized antimatter, but they had done it safely. The containment systems were crude by galactic standards, but they were also incredibly robust. Where alien technology prioritized elegance and efficiency, human engineering prioritized reliability and effectiveness. Commander Veltash, whose mockery had been particularly loud before the battle, now found himself requesting a private meeting with Captain Li Min. His ship had been one of the first to retreat when the Zephyrian attack began, and he had watched the entire human assault from a safe distance. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying none of its previous arrogance, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We underestimated not just your technology, but your approach to warfare." Other species representatives were already beginning quiet diplomatic overtures to Earth. The Centauri Federation, which had previously considered humanity a minor trade partner, suddenly found urgent reasons to upgrade their embassy on Earth. The Aquatic Collective, who had barely acknowledged human existence, began drafting mutual defense treaties. The change in attitude was immediate and profound. Where once humanity had been seen as primitive newcomers to the galactic community, they were now viewed as a military power that could single-handedly defeat threats that had overwhelmed the combined fleets of a dozen species. Captain Choi Hai, her ship held together by emergency patches and sheer determination, received a personal commendation from Admiral Thexron himself. The same admiral who had assigned the human fleet to escort duty now spoke of their tactical brilliance and unwavering courage. "Captain," Thexron said during the formal ceremony, "your species has shown us something we had forgotten. Sometimes, the most effective solution is not the most sophisticated one. Sometimes you need to fight like your life depends on it, because it does." The aftermath of the battle would echo through galactic politics for generations. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been shattered by a species most of the galaxy had considered barely worth noticing. The balance of power had shifted overnight, and everyone knew it. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. They were no longer the primitive newcomers with crude technology. They were the species that had looked at the most dangerous forces in the universe and decided to turn them into weapons. They were the apex predators who had been playing nice right up until someone threatened their survival. The age of underestimating humanity was over. The Galactic Council chamber looked the same as it had just days before, but everything else had changed completely. The same representatives sat in their designated sections, the same holographic displays showed tactical information, and the same translation systems hummed quietly in the background. But the atmosphere was utterly different. Gone was the panic that had filled the chamber during the emergency session. Gone, too, was the dismissive laughter that had greeted humanity's offer of 12 ships. Instead, there was a tense quiet, the kind of silence that comes when everyone in the room suddenly realizes they've been wrong about something very important. Captain Kim Day walked to the center of the chamber, but this time no one was snickering about primitive humans or rust bucket spaceships. The alien representatives watched her with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for dangerous predators. Her uniform still bore the scorch marks from the battle, and there was a new scar running along her left cheek from when her bridge had taken a direct hit. She wasn't the same person who had stood here days before, quietly offering Earth's small contribution to the defense effort. The battle had changed her, just as it had changed how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced the impossible and won. "Honored representatives," Kim began, her voice carrying clearly, Through the chamber without amplification. The Zephyrian threat has been eliminated, their fleet has been destroyed, and the survivors have retreated beyond our borders. The simple statement sent ripples of conversation through the assembled delegates. Admiral Kethva, whose scales had once flushed red with panic, now showed the deep blue coloration that indicated profound respect among his species. "Captain Kim," he said, rising from his seat, "the Council would like to formally acknowledge the extraordinary performance of the human fleet. Your tactics and weapons proved decisive." It was a carefully diplomatic way of saying that 12 human ships had accomplished what 2,000 alien vessels could not. The battle reports had been circulating for days, and every military commander in the galaxy had been studying them with a mixture of admiration and horror. Commander Veltash, who had been among the loudest mockers before the battle, now spoke with genuine humility. "Captain, our intelligence services are requesting detailed information about Earth's military capabilities. We need to reassess our strategic planning." The request was polite, but everyone in the chamber understood what it really meant. The alien species were terrified that they had been completely wrong about humanity's military potential. If 12 ships could destroy the Zephyrian fleet, what could Earth's full military force accomplish? Kim smiled slightly, and somehow that small expression made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Our military capabilities are adequate for Earth's defense needs. We prefer to focus on peaceful cooperation with our galactic neighbors." The words were diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. Humanity could have deployed more ships, more weapons, more devastating technology. They had chosen to send only 12 vessels, not because that was all they had, but because they had believed it would be sufficient. The realization sent a chill through the chamber. The galaxy had been sharing space with a species that possessed weapons capable of annihilating matter itself, and humanity had been keeping those capabilities largely hidden. The primitive humans had antimatter weapons, kinetic systems that bordered on relativistic weapons, and most terrifyingly, the tactical mindset to use them without hesitation. The Centauri Federation would like to propose a formal military alliance with Earth, announced Ambassador Sixtal, her crystalline voice ringing with newfound respect. "Our mutual defense agreement should be comprehensive." Other representatives quickly voiced similar proposals. The hegemony offered technology exchanges, carefully phrased to avoid sounding like they were begging for human weapons. The Aquatic Collective proposed joint training exercises, though everyone understood they wanted to study human tactics more than share their own. The change in attitude was complete and permanent, where humanity had once been seen as junior partners. In galactic civilization, they were now recognized as a major military power. The careful diplomatic language couldn't hide the fact that every species in the chamber was reassessing their relationship with Earth. Captain Kim listened to the offers and proposals with patient attention, but her response was measured. "Earth appreciates these gestures of friendship. We look forward to continued peaceful cooperation with all member species." As the session continued, one truth became increasingly clear to everyone present. Humanity's primitive technology wasn't primitive at all. It was purposely designed for maximum lethality with minimum sophistication. Where other species had developed elegant solutions to warfare, humans had focused on brutal effectiveness. The galaxy's military doctrine, which had emphasized energy weapons and adaptive defenses for thousands of years, had been revolutionized by a species that still used chemical rockets and kinetic projectiles. The implications were staggering. If humans could accomplish so much with primitive technology, what could they do with truly advanced systems? But perhaps the most unsettling realization was that humanity had been choosing restraint. They had the capability to be the galaxy's dominant military force, but they had preferred peaceful trade and cooperation. The 12 ships that had destroyed the Zephyrian fleet represented just a tiny fraction of Earth's true military potential. The Yuan age of dismissing humanity as backward newcomers was officially over. In its place came a new era built on respectful cooperation, mutual defense treaties, and the careful understanding that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses not to hunt. As Captain Kim left the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet, every representative understood that the balance of galactic power had shifted permanently. The humans were no longer the species everyone could safely ignore. They were the apex predators who had been playing nice, right up until someone had threatened the peace. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again,